What is up, Omnibus collectors? Riley here, and today we're going to be talking about my top 10 most wanted Spider-Man Omnis. So stay tuned. Alright, so today's going to be a really exciting show. I've been wanting to do this one for a while. I'm all decked out with my Spider stuff, with my Spider-Man hat from 1994 and my Spidey shirt and stuff like that, even though you can't see it. But I love Spider-Man, and I have loved Spider-Man forever. And I'm excited to talk about this list of my top 10 most wanted Spider-Man Omnis. First, the usual shoutouts. Number one, gotta give thanks to my Patreon subscribers and the newest member of the family, Brian. Thank you so much. You are awesome. Thanks for becoming a member of our Patreon family. If you like what I do here and you would also like to join the family, there is a link down below to my Patreon. You can check that out, see all the cool stuff that people get access to when you subscribe, and there's videos, behind the scene content, notes, and stuff like that. And number two, shout out to the other channel that I do, the Omnibus Collectors Network. I join a bunch of other awesome YouTubers on that channel, and we do several shows every single week where we talk about comics, movies, manga, TV shows, video games, whatever. We have a lot of fun, and if you like what I do here, you will love what we do over there as well. Now, before we get into the list, just a couple of notes. Number one, keep in mind this is my top 10 list. This is not a general top 10 list, it's just my list of the books that I would like to see. Number two, if it's a multiple volume set, I do mention all of them in the same breath. And my thought behind that is, if I didn't, you already know that, me saying something about this one means that this one is going to be a thing. That'll make more sense as I go through the list. As well, this is only focusing on 616 Peter Parker. I'm not talking about Ultimate Spider-Man or Miles or Gwen or Spider-Ham or anything like that, because I feel like there's an entire separate list to be made of my top 10 Spider Omnis, not counting Peter Parker. And it's probably something I will do eventually. So let's get into my top 10 picks for my most wanted Spider-Man Omnis. Number 10, Spectacular Spider-Man Volume 1. So this is one that people have been wanting for a while, and I think there's a particularly good chance that it actually happens because the Marvel Masterworks volumes have been released, which means that artwork has already been retouched, it's already been enhanced and stuff to be reprinted. All they have to do is compile it into the Omnibus edition. Now, my map for this would include the first 42 issues of Spectacular Spider-Man, and the main reason I stop at 42 is because that is going to bring us right up next to the material that is in the Roger Stern Omnibus. Roger Stern's Omnibus collects 43 through 61, and that's the material that he wrote on Spectacular Spider-Man, and also it collects a bunch of stuff from his run on Amazing Spider-Man. And this book is actually getting reprinted soon, so it'd be nice to see them put out Spectacular Spider-Man and have that nestle right up next to Roger Stern and be a nice collection of stories by Bill Mantlo and other people. Spectacular Spider-Man was famed for being the first secondary Spider title. This is the first secondary ongoing Spider-Man title, and it differentiated itself from everything else by focusing on a different cast of supporting characters and different villains than what Amazing was focusing on at that time. So some exciting stuff, and I know a lot of people really want to see this one done. Alright, number 9. I don't have a great name for this one, but let's just call it Spider-Man by Tom DeFalco and Friends. Basically, this is leading up to the Spider-Man by Michelini and McFarlane omnibus, and collecting a period where there was a lot of stories that were written by Tom DeFalco, but there's also stuff by Chris Priest, who was then credited as Jim Owsley, and a couple of issues by David Michelini are in here as well. Now, basically my map here would be 264 to 292, and this stuff is collected largely in some existing collected editions. But on top of those, it could also include the entire Kraven's Last Hunt storyline written by J.M. DeMatteis. I know that does have a deluxe edition of its own already, but it would be nice to have that in a omnibus edition, because after Kraven's Last Hunt there was also a 2-part crossover, the Life in the Mad Dog Ward, that crossed over with Spectacular Spider-Man at the time. So that would bring, if it does collect the Mad Dog Ward storyline, it does bring us right up next to the material in that first Michelini omnibus. So this run is highlighted by having material focusing on the return of the Hobgoblin. There's the whole gang war story arc in there as well. And if it does have those crossovers, those would be highlights of this book 2. This is also the period where Peter was no longer wearing the alien costume, but started wearing a black cloth costume that I believe Black Cat had made for him because she liked the way that the black looked on him. Number 8, Spider-Man Brand New Day. Now, Brand New Day is a really divisive period on the series. It followed One More Day directly, and One More Day, of course, is the time where stuff happens and Peter Parker sacrifices his relationship with Mary Jane in order to bring back Aunt May after J. Michael Straczynski wrapped up his whole run on Spider-Man. One More Day was recently collected in Omnibus Edition in the second JMS Omnibus, so we have the material that leads right up to Brand New Day. Now, Brand New Day was divisive when it first came out because it was kind of a soft relaunch for the Spider-Man series. It started to introduce new characters, new villains and stuff like that, and it was a lot of new things that people were not really down for. You know, we've had the same cast of villains, and it was kind of ignoring all of those, and I know that a lot of people were not a fan of that, but in retrospect, when I've read some of these stories again or look back at these stories, there's a lot of really great stuff to really enjoy here. Now, this is going to be a 2-volume set. Brand New Day lasted for quite a while. Now, one of the things that highlights this period is the fact that there was a rotating crew of different writers who were working on the Spider-Man titles during that time, and there was 3 issues per month. So we had a bunch of people like Mark Guggenheim, Bob Gale, Dan Slott, Fred Van Lente, Joe Kelly, Mark Waid. A bunch of different writers were writing different stories on Spider-Man at this time, and there was a lot of really well-known stories as well. There was a great one-issue story about Flash Thompson that stood out to me. There is the New Ways to Die story arc, of course, which featured the beginning of Anti-Venom. We had the Election Day storyline with the Menace and stuff. There was Spider-Man's crossover into Dark Reign, where he deals with the Dark Avengers and Iron Patriot, and then some good stuff. There was a great one-shot issue with Spider-Man and Deadpool written by Joe Kelly. A lot of really great material within there, and I'm gonna show I'll put notes down below of what contents I'd like to see in there. But suffice to say, I think that even though there was a lot of derision of Brand New Day before, that if they were to put out omnibus editions of this era, I think that they would do pretty well. And I think a lot of people would either be checking it out for the first time, which is great because it is a good fresh start for new Spider-Man readers, or people might be revisiting this after having not read these stories for years. Number 7 is Spider-Man by Chip Zdarsky. Now, Zdarsky took over on Spider-Man, and immediately I was like, okay, this guy is awesome. He's a hilarious writer. He has such a great sense of humor. He is going to do great work on Spider-Man. And he's joined by Adam Kubert at the beginning, so I'm like, okay, so he's a great writer. He's funny. He's going to do Spider-Man great, and he's got a great artist joining him as well. There's no way this can be bad. And I went into it expecting it was going to be a more comedic take on the character. But while he did supply, you know, funny stories, it really surprised me because I feel like in this book was where Zdarsky started to show that he's not just the funny guy. Yeah, he's a funny person, and yeah, he can write really great comedic books, but he can also write great drama and great action series when he wants to. And this was kind of the beginning of him going into that direction, because after this, of course, we got Marvel 2-in-1 and Invaders, and now we have a fantastic run on Daredevil. But after he finished his run over on Spectacular Spider-Man, he came back for a 6-issue miniseries called Life Story, which was just fantastic. Joined by artist Mark Bagley, Zdarsky gave us a story that basically every issue of this 6-issue miniseries explored a different decade of Spider-Man's life, and every decade focused on one of the things that happened in that decade during the comics. So 60s is kind of his origins, 70s is, you know, the original clones popping up with Miles Warren, the 80s was the alien costume, the 90s is the Clone Saga, and then it goes into him being part of the Avengers and stuff like that, and then eventually the introduction of Miles Morales. But along the way, Peter ages in real time, so every issue of the story we see Peter become older and become a different version of Spider-Man, and it ends with him being a much older version of the character, seeing him go through, you know, 5 decades worth of material. He's like 60-something years old by the end. It is a great miniseries that I think any big Spider-Man fan is absolutely going to love, and I think that they should collect both his Spectacular Spider-Man run along with that miniseries into one omnibus. So this would collect Spectacular Spider-Man issues 1 through 6, and then it was renumbered to legacy numbering, so it would have 297 to 310, annual number 1, Free Comic Book Day 2017, and the 6 issues of Life Story. Now bringing us around to number 6, I've got Spectacular Spider-Man by Peter David. Now, this could also be basically number 3 or volume 3 of Spectacular Spider-Man or something like that, but I wanted to focus on Peter David individually. Now, my map for this would basically be having just the Peter David issues. It was like 101 through 131, and then 134 through 138, I think, is what he wrote. There were some other writers in there as well that wrote some of the issues in between. There's like maybe 5 or 6 of those issues that I mentioned that he didn't write. So an alternative way to do this would be calling it like Spider-Man by Peter David and pulling those issues out and then inserting issues that he wrote from Web of Spider-Man or Amazing Spider-Man. But I'd rather keep it just a solid block of issues from Spectacular at the time and include those issues not written by him, because otherwise if you take them out, I fear that they'll basically be orphaned and never be collected in an oversized edition. Anyway, Peter David's run is highlighted particularly, I feel like the story that most people know him for is the death of Jean DeWolff, and this is one that people are often revisiting in modern storylines. Even right now, Nick Spencer's Spider-Man is doing an arc that's kind of based off of the death of Jean DeWolff. And Peter David is also a pretty prolific writer when it comes to Spider-Man, not just for Peter, but he's written for a bunch of other Spider characters like Spider-Man 29 and Scarlet Spider and stuff like that. So he has a huge repertoire for Spider-Man series leading all the way up to his current Spider-Man material, the miniseries Symbiote Spider-Man. He's done 2 Symbiote Spider-Man miniseries, which are set during that time that Peter was originally wearing the alien costume. But they're new stories exploring different aspects that we hadn't seen before. And he's done 2 of those minis thus far, the original and then one subtitled Alien Reality, and it looks like he's going to be coming back for more of that material. So it'd be really awesome to see an omnibus of his material, given that he's now getting a chance to return to writing Peter after a few years that he's been away from the character. As well, Peter David's name has started to appear on Marvel Omnibus editions since we've gotten his Incredible Hulk, the second omnibus about to come out. So as is known, oftentimes when Marvel releases one omnibus with someone's name on it, there is a great chance that they'll start releasing more omnis with that person's name. And that pulls us around to number 5, the Alien Costume Saga. So the Alien Costume Saga is the period where Peter comes back from Battleworld and is wearing this black costume. And it's a mysterious new thing that, as the series progresses, we find out has a mind of its own and is having him do things against his will. And this Alien Costume Saga is all of the stories across all the Spider titles at the time that deal with him wearing that costume until the eventual point where he has to remove it. So this would include issues 252 to 263, 141 to 150 of Marvel Team Up and Annual Number 7, Spectacular Spider-Man 90 to 100, and Annual Number 4, and then the first issue of Web of Spider-Man. So a lot of great stuff here, and there's a really nice precedent for them to cover this in an omnibus edition, given that these 2 paperbacks are out of print, very expensive and hard to find. As well, given the popularity of Venom as a character, the fact that he's super popular in the comics from Donny Cates' run, and also he has the upcoming sequel for his film coming out, I think now would be a great time to release this, since it's kind of a Road to Venom type of story, and everyone loves the black costume. Who doesn't love the black costume? I know someone in the comments can be like, I hate the black costume, go away. And number 4 on my list is Spider-Man The Gauntlet. The Gauntlet would kind of be Brand New Day Omnibus Volume 3, but I think that it stands on its own well enough that I could separate it on this list. Essentially, after many issues of the whole Brand New Day Brain Trust era and Spider-Man interacting with new characters and new villains and stuff, they finally started reintroducing all of his classic villains again. And The Gauntlet is a storyline where arc after arc after arc, Peter is not being given a break, and he is constantly having to fight through a gauntlet of all of his most famous foes, including Mysterio, Rhino, Electro, Lizard, Vulture, Kraven. All these characters are finally coming back to haunt him after however many issues that they had not been around. And there is some fantastic material. By this point in the Spidey Brain Trust era, everyone was firing on all cylinders. I feel like there might have been one weak arc in the bunch, but mostly this is some fantastic stuff with really awesome stories like Dan Slott's Mysterio and Joe Kelly's Rhino stories in particular were fantastic. Zeb Wells' Lizard storyline was great, and this all leads up to Joe Kelly wrapping it up with the Grim Hunt storyline. Now, on top of including all of the material from the Gauntlet and the Grim Hunt, I'd go ahead and wrap up the era leading into Big Time when Dan Slott takes over by also collecting here the 2 arcs that followed Grim Hunt, One Moment in Time, which kind of goes back to what happened in One More Day, and then Origin of the Species, which wraps everything up and leads us right into Dan Slott's era on the book. Now, number 3, this is one that I know a lot of people, pretty much if you collect Spider-Man Omnis, this is stuff that you're looking forward to, and that's Amazing Spider-Man Volumes 5 and 6. Now, again, I'm lumping a couple of books into one listing, and that's because if I say 5, you know that 6 is going to happen anyway. There's no point in me not mentioning it. Now, this material would basically lead right up to the Amazing Spider-Man issues in Roger Stern's Omnibus. And I mentioned earlier that Omnibus is getting a reprint, so I feel like it's even more likely that they want to highlight that fact and release these books that lead right up to that Stern Omnibus. They want that material to be available for people to have. So why am I so sure that this is going to wrap up right next to the Roger Stern stuff? Well, I have a very high certainty because of the pattern that they've been taking with the Marvel Masterworks editions when putting that material into the Omnibus editions, where basically every Omnibus is 3.5 volumes of the Marvel Masterworks edition. So if you look at the material, the first 2 Omnis collect the first 7 Marvel Masterworks, and then Marvel Masterworks 8 through 14 make up the material in Omnis 3 and 4, which means that the material from Masterworks 15 through 21 very likely will make up the material in the 5th and 6th Omnibus editions. And, surprise, surprise, the 21st Marvel Masterwork winds up collecting through issue 223, which is the last issue right before the Roger Stern Omnibus. So, in all, these 2 volumes would go through issues 143 to 223, with annuals number 10 through 15. As well, the Masterworks collect some other material, so I'm going to go ahead and list that here as well. Nova issue 12, Marvel Treasury 14, Mighty Marvel Comics Calendar from 1978, and the first Spectacular Spider-Man Annual. So, what stories are in this? Basically, we have a lot of material from Jerry Conway, Len Wein, Marv Wolfman, and the late Denny O'Neil, and out of all of them, I think the biggest highlight for me is the original Clone Saga from Jerry Conway. And this is where we see the original clones from Miles Warren of Gwen Stacy and of Peter Parker, which eventually lead towards the Clone Saga of the 90s. So some really awesome material in here, and I'm sure that they're going to happen sooner than later, probably Volume 5 around the marketing window for the next Spider-Man movie in the MCU, and then Volume 6 not too long after that. And that brings us around to number 2, and this is the biggest one on my list, and that is Spider-Man by Dan Slott. Now, Dan Slott wrote a rather extensive period on the Spider-Man title, and I've broken it up into 6 omnibus editions. So I'm going to go through the material. I've got notes here, so you're going to see me looking down and glancing at my notes a lot during this point. But I'm going to talk about what would be in each volume and then kind of show what collections we have right now. So Dan Slott comes in right after the Brain Trust Brand New Day era wraps up, and he starts up with the Big Time story arc. Now, Big Time saw, basically the big thing was that it was a return to having one writer with a rotating crew of artists on the series instead of a rotating crew of writers. And we saw a lot of big developments start happening for Spider-Man. One of the biggest things being that he started working at a group called Horizon, where he was able to create tech and stuff, and he could use that as kind of a cover and use the funding from Horizon to create new tech for his own purposes as Spider-Man. So we would see a lot of new costumes that he would use against new villains and stuff, and it was a really cool time for Spider-Man. There was some up and down with the quality, especially there at the beginning, but I think once Slott really found his footing, he was delivering more really fantastic story arcs than he wasn't. Now, the first volume would collect the first basically half of the Big Time era on Amazing. I've mapped it out to include issues 648 to 673, as well as 654.1, which is the first appearance of Flash Thompson as Agent Venom, the Amazing Spider-Man Infested one-shot, material from Free Comic Book Day 2011, Spider Island Deadly Foes #1, and the Spider Island Spotlight. So this brings it up to 31 issues total, and features some of the well-known arcs such as the New Hobgoblin and the arc, what is it, No More Deaths or No One Dies, with beautiful artwork from Marcos Martin. And this would also include the big Spider Island event that Dan Slott told. Now this brings us to the second half of the Big Time era. So Big Time Part 2, or Ends of the Earth, or Dying Wish, which are the titles of a couple of the more popular story arcs within that. This one I've mapped out to include issues 674 through 700, which brings us to the end of the Amazing Spider-Man series, as well as 679.1 and Daredevil number 8, which was part of a two-part crossover with one of the issues of Amazing Spider-Man around the time. And then also including Amazing Spider-Man Ends of the Earth number 1, Avenging Spider-Man number 8, which was a Ends of the Earth epilogue type volume. And then that leads into kind of, these are spoilers. This happened a while ago, and most people, if you know Spider-Man, then you know what happened. But just in case, if you don't know what happens at this point, spoilers, this leads to the death of Spider-Man when Dr. Octopus takes over Peter's body, and for the next couple of years is acting as Spider-Man. So that's what the Dying Wish storyline is. It's Doc Ock's Dying Wish, essentially. And that leads us right into most people's favorite part of Slott's run on Spider-Man, and that is the Superior Spider-Man storyline. This is Dr. Octopus inside of Peter's body. And Doc Ock, basically, he's like, if I get a better body, then I can be a better octopus. I'm gonna, wreak havoc and do all my villainous stuff, yada, yada, yada. But he becomes Peter and starts kind of trying to live in Peter's life. And he realizes all this mess that Peter has going on. He's like, you're such a smart guy. Why aren't you using your brain? Why aren't you actually trying to better yourself? And he's like, you know what? I'm just going to be a better version of Peter Parker, and I'm going to be a better version of Spider-Man. Hence the title of Superior Spider-Man. Now, the series went on for a couple of years, and there was a lot of really fantastic arcs with a lot of great villains throughout. But the best part of the series is really seeing the character arc of Dr. Octopus as he transforms throughout the series and starts caring more about being a good guy and doing good things until eventually, spoilers, but obviously this happens, Peter Parker comes back and winds up taking over his body. Now, the Omnibus edition would include the 31-issue run on Superior Spider-Man, and it could possibly also include issues 1 and 2 of the annual and Superior Spider-Man 6 AU. None of those were actually written by Slott, which is why I say they're optional, but probably want to include them anyway just for completion's sake, since it is an omnibus edition. And this leads into the 4th volume, and that is the return of the Amazing Spider-Man. This one is highlighted by including the Spider-Verse storyline. This is the big storyline where all the different Spider-Men from different universes come together to fight against one common threat. It was really fantastic, and it was the inspiration for the Into the Spider-Verse movie, so there is that. And this one is collected across some oversized hardcovers as well. 2 volumes collect that entire run, but there is some bonus material that the Omnibus could include that are not included in those volumes. So my mapping is issues 1.1 to 1.5, the Learning to Crawl series, Amazing Spider-Man 1 through 18, Superior Spider-Man 32 and 33. That character came back during the Spider-Verse story arc, so they did 2 more issues of Superior at that time. The 5-issue Renew Your Vows miniseries that happened during Spider-Verse, and then material from Free Comic Book Day 2014 and material from Spider-Verse numbers 1 and 2. So, like I said, it does have that Spider-Verse story arc. It introduces Spider-Gwen and all that stuff. It sees the big team up between a lot of these characters, inspiring the movie and all that good stuff. And now that brings us to the worldwide era of the Amazing Spider-Man. Now, after Spider-Verse, Peter basically starts taking advantage of all the stuff that Dr. Octopus had done while he was in his body, and takes advantage of Parker Industries and starts to create even better tech for himself. And he has adventures. It's called Worldwide because he has a lot of adventures that have him going across the globe and stuff and interacting with a lot of different characters. And this is collected across several oversized hardcover editions. Now, the map that I have here would be that this includes issues 1 through 24 of Amazing Spider-Man, as well as the Clone Conspiracy story arc. Clone Conspiracy numbers 1 through 5 crossed over with issues from Amazing Spider-Man to tell this story about kind of the return of the clones and Ben Reilly and all of that stuff. And also I would include the Clone Conspiracy Omega #1, and material from Free Comic Book Day 2016. So that would make this one a 31-issue omnibus. Most of the omnis at this point, they're all about the same size. However, the last omnibus worth of Dan Slott's material is going to be a little bit slimmer than the ones before it. And that is volume 6. I've subtitled this one Legacy, or it can just be called The End, or knowing Marvel, they're probably just going to title it Amazing Spider-Man by Dan Slott 1 through 5 or 1 through 6, or however they want to break it up. But basically, this is the final chunk of material from Slott's run on Spider-Man. And the annoying part here is that some of this stuff has not actually been collected across oversized hardcover, so it would be nice to see this material in oversized hardcovers. For whatever reason, they decided not to release Worldwide Volume 4 and just skipped right to the end with the Red Goblin story arc. So this would include issues 25 through 32 and 789 to 801 of Amazing Spider-Man, as well as Venom Inc. Alpha, Venom Inc. Omega, and Venom issues 159 to 160. Those were part of the whole Venom Inc. crossover. And this brings it to 25 total issues. Like I said, it's smaller than the previous Spider-Man by Dan Slott Omnis. I tried my best to make them even, but this is what I got. But that is all of Dan Slott's material across 6 omnibus editions. I don't know what the chances are that they're going to do the whole thing. I think if anything, they might do a Superior Spider-Man Omni, since that is the most well-received part of his run. And then they might do something for Spider-Verse, given the popularity of the Spider-Verse movie and the fact that there is a sequel, at least one sequel coming for the Spider-Verse movie. It makes sense that they might want to capitalize and do that. But they could also probably do a Spider-Geddon omnibus if they wanted to, in relation to the Spider-Verse movies. And that's kind of an honorable mention here. Spider-Geddon was a return of Slott as the plotter for this event that kind of followed up on Spider-Verse, reintroduced the same type of villains and stuff, and was a similar story where Spider-Men from all across the multiverse came together to fight against this one common villain. It wasn't part of the main Spider-Man title at the time, but it did have crossover issues from Spectacular Spider-Man and a bunch of crossovers from different series. But if they were to do an omnibus of this, I think that they should also include the second Superior Spider-Man series written by Christos Gage. Christos Gage writes Spider-Geddon, and he also introduces, or I should say reintroduces, the Superior Spider-Man in the pages of that event. So it would make some sense to see that 12-issue Superior Spider-Man series collected alongside Spider-Geddon. Also because there's a villain that appears in the Superior Spider-Man series that was introduced in Spider-Geddon, so it could make sense. All right, and that brings us down to #1, and this is one that I really hope is going to happen, and I have a lot of confidence this one's not too far off around the corner from actually being published, and I know a lot of other people really want to see that one. And this is The Amazing Spider-Man by David Michelinie with Mark Bagley. So a lot of this has been collected across different paperback editions. We have the Round Robin Epic Collection. Some of it is collected in the Carnage Classic paperback, and there is the old, very out of print Invasion of the Spider Slayers paperback. But essentially, this is going to come right after the Eric Larson omnibus and collect issues 351 to 378, and then issues 382 to 393, which brings us right up to the first Clone Saga omnibus. So this would complete the Michelinie trio of omnis. Now, there's a gap that I put in there, and that was issues 379 through 381. Those issues make up the Maximum Carnage crossover. And the reason I left that out is because this is already going to be a large volume, and there's no way that we could include the entire crossover there. Now, they could include just the issues of Amazing Spider-Man if they wanted to, but I feel like it's kind of pointless to just include 3 parts of a 14-part crossover. So I would just cut it out. And they already have Maximum Carnage in an omnibus edition. It is already collected in the Spider-Man vs. Venom omnibus, which is the main reason why I bought this book, was because of that storyline. But I think that they should also do something else to, since that's out of print now, they should do something else to also collect Maximum Carnage, whether it be a single oversized hardcover deluxe edition for that storyline, or my preference would be that they do a Carnage Classic omnibus, which would basically collect all of the material from this Carnage Classic paperback plus the Maximum Carnage event, and then maybe some other Carnage material that's not in the Carnage omnibus that we got a few years ago that has all the mini-series from like Zeb Wells and the series by Jerry Conway. So there's a lot of great stuff in here. There's the Tri-Sentinel story, there's the Spider Slayers story, the origin of Carnage is in here. A lot of really awesome things happen. And of course, it's made up with a ton of awesome artwork by Mark Bagley. Now, I know there is some material in here that's not written by David Michelinie. I think there's an arc written by Archie Goodwin in here, and there's also several issues that don't have artwork by Mark Bagley, but I wouldn't want to sacrifice those issues just because they don't have those creators. I would say go ahead and shove them in here. I think only maybe a couple of issues have neither creator on it, so whatever, just put those in here. Don't orphan those issues. Make sure that this fills that complete gap between the Larson Omnibus and the first Clone Saga Omnibus. This is something I've been hoping they would do for a long time, and I think that there is some precedence now to release this book. There's more focus on Carnage. We've had the Absolute Carnage storyline, and I know that David over at Marvel, David Gabriel, is aware that this is a book that could exist, that does not exist yet, and that it could exist. So that, I think, is a really big step towards making this a reality, making this a thing that would happen. So yeah, that is my #1 most wanted book. So I know I didn't include some people's favorite books that, you know, people would want to see included here, including there's the runs by Howard Mackie, there's Paul Jenkins' run on Spider-Man. I know a lot of people want to see that material that's after the Ben Reilly saga. I know some of that is Howard Mackie and some of that's not, collected in the omnibus editions. So whatever I didn't talk about here, you know, Web of Spider-Man, more stuff from Spectacular Spider-Man, let me know down below which series and which runs I didn't mention on this video. I love Spider-Man, and I have had all these ideas in my head for years about these different omnis that I would like to see. And I think that a lot of these have a great chance of happening in the near future. So fingers crossed that we do wind up seeing some more, because I'm always excited to see more Spider-Man Omnibus editions. Anyway, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can get notified for all the awesome videos I put out every single week. And otherwise, I will see you all next time. Peace out.